She started missing dinner on Thursdays first, then Mondays, like the calendar had begun to hollow itself from the inside out, leaving neat little holes where warmth used to live. The apartment learned her absences before I admitted them, plates stacking quietly in the sink, one chair always pushed a few inches farther back than mine, a shadow on the wall where her coat used to hang by instinct, not decision. I told myself it was the audit season at her firm, the long swing of fluorescent lights and coffee breath, and the soft brag of late-night deliverables pulling her steady heartbeat a few blocks away from home. On Friday, she texted me a rain emoji and the words, "running late," and I stared at the screen wondering when we had started speaking in weather. I set out 2 plates anyway. I lit a candle I didn't believe in and turned off the overheads, watching the room fall into that forgiving amber where everything looks a shade kinder than it is. The candle danced like a tired apology. Our best conversations used to happen between mouthfuls. It was our language of truce, the knife and fork pauses, the try this, the is it too salty, these small, sacred negotiations of care. Lately, meals had become broadcasts. She would report her day in blurts, I would try to catch the pieces, and both of us pretended the static was just background. The quiet got heavier, until it was no longer quiet at all, but an object we had to step around to reach the sink. I started going on walks after dark, hands deep in my pockets like I owed the night an apology for taking up space. The rain came most evenings in a fine mist, a kind of forgiveness that never quite landed. Streetlights made halos on the pavement, the city's long breath hummed through the soles of my shoes, and I tried on futures like thrift store coats. This one where we fix things, that one where we don't, another where I forget how her laugh feels against my chest bone. On the night everything shifted, the pasta overcooked by 4 minutes because I was rinsing a glass and thinking about a dog we never got. I drained it anyway, threw butter and garlic and courage into a pan, and plated it like restraint. A careful mound, shaved parmesan like snow over a small field. I set a napkin on her side of the table without looking, the muscle memory of loving her stronger than my doubt. Her second text said, "Don't wait up." The words were light. They did not look like a weapon until I picked them up. I ate alone. The chair opposite me stayed empty in the way an empty chair knows it is being watched. When I finished, I washed both plates anyway. It felt like a prayer to a god I wasn't sure I believed in. The discovery was not cinematic. There was no smeared lipstick on a collar, no perfume so new it tripped alarms in the air. It was a receipt, small and indecent. I found it by accident when I picked up her coat the next morning, the one that still remembered her shape even if I pretended not to. The paper stuck to my fingers, the ink slightly smudged from damp weather, 2 cocktails at a hotel bar we'd never been to together, 2 entrees that sounded expensive on purpose, a late timestamp that swallowed midnight and didn't choke. My first feeling was not anger. It was a quiet, like the ocean stepping back before it decides if it's going to take the shore. I held the receipt long enough for my hands to stop being my hands, long enough to understand it wasn't proof I needed so much as permission to know the thing I already knew. For the next hours, I moved like rooms were smaller than they used to be. I put the kettle on and never poured the water. I wiped the counter and left the sponge where it didn't belong. My phone was a lighthouse I didn't want to look at. Every vibration could have been her, and every silence was. At noon, I sat at the table where we had promised too many small forevers and searched her face in the memory of last week, the angle she used to stand when she was telling the truth, the cadence that disappeared when she wasn't. I found nothing useful. Love confuses evidence. It turns everything into an alibi. I opened our shared laptop, not to spy, I told myself, but to borrow the familiar. Her browser was a map left under a park bench. Hotel name in a search bar, a florist near our building with a late closing time, an article about forgiveness I had read years ago and forgotten. The open tabs were a chorus humming softly behind me. I closed the laptop. I sat with the candle from last night, the wick now a small, blackened question mark, and I made a decision, not about her but about me. If there was a collapse coming, I would stand under it and learn its shape. By 5, the rain had turned committed. Drops struck the window with the seriousness of a deadline. I wrote a note out by hand and then tore it up because I could not yet decide who I wanted to be when I spoke. The apartment was a church and a crime scene. The carpet held footprints of our ordinary days. The fridge hummed like a witness avoiding eye contact. At 6, I set the table again. 2 plates, 2 glasses. I defied the part of me that wanted to disappear into the couch or run until my lungs forgot my name. I cooked the same dish I had made last night, identical down to the sequence. Butter, garlic, the salt scattered like a small snow. I bought flowers on the corner, white lilies, because they smell like complicated grief and weddings that went ahead anyway. By 7, the apartment looked like a photograph from a cookbook that knew nothing about human beings. Candlelight again, 2 plates again. the door a mouth waiting to open. I sat in my chair and counted the spaces between car tires hissing through rain. When she came home, I told myself the room would be arraigned with both of us as witnesses. I would ask for the truth with my hands open. I would not raise my voice because some stones only sink when the water is still. From the hallway, a lift bell, a second set of footsteps. The key paused at the lock like it, too, had something to confess. The door swung. Her eyes landed on the table, on the candles, the plates, the lilies that did not apologize for their scent. And in that half second before her face arranged itself into the next moment, I saw everything I needed to know. She stepped inside. Behind her, a shadow moved and then decided not to. The door hesitated, then closed. Her coat dripped onto the mat. Rain shook itself from the world and tapped the windows in the smallest applause. "Dinner?" I said, almost gently. She swallowed and set her bag down, fingers lingering on the strap like there was a chance it could save her. The room pulled tighter around our breaths. And then from the hallway, another voice, low, an apology hitting the wrong room. "I'll wait outside." The apartment did not move. She did not move. In the space where our lives used to be, something cracked without a sound. Cliffhanger. I pulled out her chair, the candle flame wavering between us, and asked, "Do you want to eat first or tell me his name?" That night dissolved into fragments, like a glass breaking in another room. You don't see the shatter, but you live with its edges. She said his name only once, Daniel, clipped like a confession she wanted to keep small. It fell between us and lay there, making everything else we said look like it was trying too hard. We did not fight. If someone had pressed an ear to the wall, they'd have heard long stretches of nothing, then the soft friction of a chair leg, the clink of a fork when I forgot and touched the plate, the quietest version of two lives renegotiating gravity. When she spoke, it was in the grammar of remorse. I didn't plan. It was a mistake. I don't know how. The sentences were gray, all weather and no sky. I asked her when. "A few months," she said, and in those syllables I felt entire calendar pages buckle. I asked her why, and she said words that meant nothing, tired, lonely, invisible, words that made every kindness I had poured into our days turn to vapor. It is strange how betrayal hands you a map, and not a destination. Daniel waited in the hallway for too long, or maybe time just stretched to make room for my humiliation. At some point I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. He was taller than me, or maybe his guilt made him look that way. His eyes went everywhere but mine, like he had been trained to look for exits in case of fire. He said, "I'm sorry," and I realized apology is a currency we print at home with a cheap machine. "Leave," I said softly. He left. The hallway swallowed him without a sound. The days after broke into a schedule that wasn't one. Sleep in shards, wake up too early and then too late, make coffee as if it were an answer. The hum of the fridge, the scrape of the blinds when the morning wind got playful, rain rehearsing its lines against the glass. The apartment had our breathlessness memorized. Evidence of her stood up in tiny ways and told their version of the story. A wineglass in the sink with lipstick so pale it looked like a thought. A jacket that wasn't hers, left in the hall closet like a dare. A florist's card in the trash with no writing on it because some gestures are safer when they stay unsent. I tried being angry at objects. They refused to argue back. Nights became their own country. I would lie in bed and watch headlights stutter across the ceiling, and in the intervals between light and dark, I practiced choosing myself. Sometimes I pulled it off for whole minutes at a time. Other nights I reached for her in my sleep and woke with my hand empty, the room looking at me with a tender kind of disappointment. Friends texted, "You okay?" I lied in ways that sounded like truth. "Rough week," I sent back. Grief is private not because it should be, but because there's no audience that can keep a straight face. One afternoon, I found myself outside the hotel from the receipt, as if my feet had decided my head needed an illustration. The lobby smelled like citrus and money. Couples moved through it in muted laughter, ring fingers bright, luggage wheels confessing their trajectories. I stood for a minute and practiced not storming the desk, not asking a stranger to confirm I had been a fool. I left with nothing except proof of my own restraint. At home, I started putting things in boxes. Not to move, I told myself, to breathe. The wedding album snapped shut around photographs so radiant it hurt to turn the pages. Her sweaters went into a clean plastic bin that smelled like manufactured winter. I labeled nothing. Names seemed dangerous. She stayed at a friend's place, and the apartment adjusted its weight. I began eating at the counter, standing up, as if chairs were an endorsement of permanence I hadn't earned. Music felt like an intrusion, so I listened to the washing machine instead, that loyal drum telling me over and over that cycle's end. Daniel texted once, a number I didn't recognize, asking if we could talk. I stared at it long enough to imagine ways it could be a spammer, a wrong number, a different Daniel with someone else's tragedy attached. I responded with a single line, "There's nothing you can say that helps." He wrote back, "I'm sorry." I blocked the number, not out of power but preservation. The turning point didn't have a speech. It was a morning where the rain paused and light came into the living room with a patience I didn't recognize. The coffee smelled like a reason. I sat in the chair that used to be mine by habit and felt, for the first time in weeks, the chair hold me like it meant it. I said out loud to no one, "I am still here." The room accepted the terms. I started running in the evenings. The city took my heaviest thoughts and spread them across blocks until they looked manageable. On the third night, I ran past a small park I'd ignored for years and watched a father teach his kid how to throw a ball under a sky that had stopped threatening rain. The ball arced, fell, and was caught with the kind of joy that refuses metaphor. I kept moving. At home, I cooked for one on purpose. I plated intentionally, placed a fork and knife for a single person, sat, and ate while looking at the chair across from me without flinching. The silence wasn't a verdict anymore. It was a companion with good posture. Her texts came in polite and measured. Updates about her schedule, requests to grab more clothes, questions about the mail. I answered with the same politeness because in the rubble of us, decorum was the only tool I trusted not to collapse in my hand. Each exchange was a transaction with a receipt no longer than a single line. Late one night, I found the box with our vows. I read mine like an archaeologist, curious about the species that wrote them. There was love in those words, earnest and bright, and there was also a kind of hubris that only youth can pronounce without irony. I folded the paper carefully and set it back, not as a keepsake but a record. The city's hum pressed its ear to our windows. I slept for 4 hours in a row for the first time. In the morning, light fell onto the table where the lilies had gone browner at the edges but still insisted on their existence. I threw them out gently. That afternoon, she called not to coordinate but to say, "Can we talk?" Her voice wore its tiredness like a coat that didn't fit. I said yes. When I hung up, the apartment felt like it was holding its breath for a storm that might decide to go around us this time. Cliffhanger. I straightened the chairs, opened a window to let in the cleanest part of the air, and waited for the knock I could already hear. When she finally came back, it was not with romance, not with tears, not with promises wrapped in ribbon. It was a Tuesday at 7:10 p.m., the hallway smelling like wet umbrellas and takeout, the elevator sighing like it had overseen too many human dramas to be impressed by one more. She wore a gray sweater that used to be mine and a look like rain on a window that can't decide if it wants to stay. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said. We sat at the table we had practiced not using. I made tea because it gave my hands a script. Steam rose between us like a ghost we were both trying to recognize without saying its name. Her apology was not a single thing. It arrived in pieces, in pauses, in the way her fingers worried the seam of her sleeve. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, which is usually something people say when they do. "I made you small," she added, and the honesty of that sentence sat down in the room like a new chair. "I felt small," I said, "but not because of you." It was only partly true. Betrayal compresses and expands you in odd places. Some parts go fragile, others learn to carry weight they never asked for. She talked about Daniel in the past tense, which is 1/10 too late for me. She said it had ended, that it had been ending even before I knew. She described it like a hunger that made her think the whole world could be solved by a single bite, only to find herself more starved when it was over. I didn't ask for details, because intimacy doesn't have to be a crime scene. Sometimes not knowing is the only way to keep the floor steady. "I regret it," she said, and the words sounded like she'd been practicing them in an empty room for days. "I regret what I did to you, to us, to myself." "Regret is a good start," I said, and hated how wise it sounded. We sat with our tea. The city pressed its usual soundtrack through the windows, the distant siren, a bus exhaling, neighbors' cutlery clinking like coins counted for rent. The ordinary insisted on its place in our narrative. "What do you want?" I asked, not to trap her, but to let her hear the shape of her answer. "I want to be honest," she said. "I want to be kind." She looked at the doorway to our bedroom like it might offer a different line. "I don't know what I want past that." "Then that's what we have," I said. "Honesty and kindness. The rest is weather." She cried without flooding the room. A clean, quiet kind of crying that changes the air but doesn't make you drown. I passed her a tissue, and she took it with the careful gratitude of someone borrowing fire. We didn't touch. Respect sometimes looks like distance. "I keep thinking about our first apartment," she said after a while, voice steadier. "The one with the awful green carpet and the shower that squealed like a violin that hated music." I laughed, surprising myself with the softness of the sound. "We were broke," she said, "and happy like we'd invented the word." "We were simple," I said. "We mistook that for happiness, and sometimes we were right." She nodded. "I think I lost track of the simple." Her eyes met mine for the first time without flinching. I'm not asking for you back. I'm asking for your grace. There are words that require you to stand when you hear them. Grace is one. I stayed seated. I can try, I said. That's all I have. We took a walk, the way people in movies do when they need the city to do some of the talking. The rain had retired for the evening, leaving the streets rinsed and reflective. Storefronts doubled themselves in puddles, and the sky held a shy kind of blue over the rooftops. We didn't hold hands. We walked side by side like a pair of parentheses. She told me she'd started seeing a therapist. That she had written letters to herself that began, "I'm listening." That she had told Daniel she couldn't keep dividing herself into halves and calling each one a whole. I listened without rewarding or punishing the information. I learned the shape of my neutrality and found it could be kind. Back at the apartment, we stood at the door, not sure how to deliver ourselves to the next minute. The hallway light clicked off and then on again, timed mercy. "Would you like to come in?" I asked, and it wasn't a trap. She stepped inside, eyes falling to the table, the chairs straight, the window cracked open an inch like the room needed to remember the world outside. She looked at the counter where I'd lined up 2 mugs earlier without meaning to. I watched her see the life we had, the life we broke, the life we might learn to set down gently and step away from without shattering more than necessary. "I made dinner," I said, and she smiled in a way that didn't ask for anything. We ate quietly, each forkful a vote for civility. She thanked me for the meal as if it were an offering and not a habit. When she stood to leave, we hugged carefully, like 2 people learning a new language. We both let go first. At the door, she paused. "He keeps trying to apologize," she said, eyes on the floor. I told him not to. Her voice carried no pride, just a small exhaustion. "Good," I said. She looked up. "Will you be okay?" "I am," I said, and it was both promise and aspiration. Cliffhanger. When the door clicked shut, I stood in the quiet and heard, through the thin apartment wall, the soft, unmistakable sound of a key testing our lock from the other side, and then withdrawing. Morning has its own morality. It tells the truth by simply arriving. The day after she came back and then left, the light entered the living room like it had knocked first. I stood in the doorway holding a mug and thought about how every object survives the people who argue in front of it. Coffee is better alone when you mean it. I meant it. The steam blurred the edges of the window's view, the brick across the alley, the line of laundry strung like simple syntax between 2 stubborn lives. A sparrow landed on the railing and tilted its head as if to say, "Choose." I cleaned the apartment slowly, not to erase her, but to find myself in the surfaces. The sink shone. The table gave back a soft version of my face. I opened the bedroom window wider and let the morning in until the sheets smelled like surrender in the good way. She texted later to say thank you for last night. I wrote back that kindness is not a negotiation. She sent a single heart, the polite kind, not the begging one, and then nothing else. Quiet can be generosity when you stop measuring it against noise. Around noon, I took the box with our wedding album out again. I didn't open it this time. I walked it to the hall closet and put it on the top shelf, not to hide but to honor. Objects are not guilty. They only remember. In the afternoon, rain rehearsed on and off. The city's breath felt shallower, like it, too, was learning to live with less. I made soup, a repetition from the earliest years when everything we owned fit in a hatchback, and the future was a couch rescued from the curb and a plant that refused to die. The smell filled the room with something older than us. Forgiveness surprised me by not wearing a cape. It came as a small loosening in the chest while I was watching a pot simmer. It said, "You can stop guarding the door now." It did not say take her back or forget. It said, "You are not the worst thing that happened to you." I wrote a letter I didn't plan to send. "I loved you in the present tense," I began. "I will love the part of my life that had you in it without mistaking that for a future." I folded the paper once, then again, until it felt like a small, honest weight. I placed it in the drawer with spare batteries and the screwdriver that opens every stubborn back panel in the house. In the evening, the rain decided, finally, and came down steady. I turned off the lights and let the room be a listening station. The city was a radio between stations, the static full of names. I lay on the couch and watched the ceiling discover and lose the shape of passing headlights. When sleep came, it did so without bargaining. I woke before dawn to a blue, so quiet it felt like a secret passed just to me. I stood at the window and imagined her somewhere else under a similar light, making a tea, staring into a middle distance that no longer included me. I wished her gentleness without saying it out loud. Letting go is not a fire sale. It is not fury in a dumpster behind the building. It is a set of small doors opened with care in a house you built together, each room ventilated until the air trades hands without complaint. It is choosing to keep the good plates for yourself and still using them on Tuesdays. I put on my shoes and walked. The sidewalks kept their promises. puddles held the city's upside-down face, and for once it didn't look like a warning. A bus hissed to a stop. A woman laughed into her scarf. Somewhere, a bakery forgave the night with sugar. I passed the small park and watched an older couple share an umbrella like a vow that learned to bend. Back home, I opened the window wide and made the bed so clean it looked like a declaration. I ate breakfast at the table with both chairs exactly where they belonged. I didn't imagine filling the other one. I didn't imagine it empty. I let it be a chair. The phone stayed quiet. The rain relaxed. The morning did what mornings do. It kept going, gently indifferent, thoroughly kind. I washed the mug and placed it on the rack and watched the last of the water slip from its lip and vanish without theater. There in that trivial disappearance was the lesson my wiser friends never tried to articulate. Not everything that leaves you is a theft. Sometimes, what drains away is exactly the surplus you were never meant to carry. Ending cliff quiet. I stood in the doorway between rooms and listened to the soft tick of the cooling stove, the rain's final murmurs, and the small, steady sound of my own breathing, and understood that it was enough.